My husband, with whom I have been in love for 9 years, has lost his memory and thinks he has a white moonlight that he loves but cannot have. I originally thought that Zachary was just confused in his memory and had placed our past memories on a fictional white moonlight. Later, I realized that I was extremely wrong. This is the fourth time I have been driven out of the ward by him after Zachary's car accident. The white door made a loud noise. The wooden door panel stopped just in front of my nose. Although it didn't touch me, it was like being slapped hard. Several people standing outside were whispering. Charlie came up and gently persuaded me, "Sister-in-law, Zachary's memory is a bit chaotic now and his emotions are not stable. Don't be angry." I tidied up the stray hairs at my temples and sighed softly. "I'm not angry. I just don't understand. After losing his memory, Zachary is gentle and polite to everyone, but when he sees me, he is like an enemy. Even if he hates me because of the white moonlight that he loves but cannot have in his heart, it wouldn't go so far." I gave the thermos bucket in my hand to Charlie. "Give this to him later. If he still refuses to eat it, just throw it away." Charlie took it, still hesitating. "Sister-in-law. It's okay." I showed a smile. "When he remembers, let him compensate me fully. On the day Zachary had a car accident, I was abroad. I rushed back overnight, but all I received was his cold face. When I arrived at the hospital, it was midnight. The lights in the corridor were a bit dim. The long corridor, empty and without anyone, inexplicably showed an indifferent and lonely atmosphere. When I pushed open the door, Zachary was still awake. He was sitting on the bed in a hospital gown, with a circle of gauze around his forehead. His face was pale and expressionless. He was completely different from the him I usually saw. Zachary met my eyes. Before I could speak, a huge noise exploded behind me. A black object flew past me and landed on the wall. My heartbeat accelerated. Then I heard my husband coldly utter a word, "Get out." Later, the doctor told me that Zachary had lost his memory. He lost his memory, but not completely. He forgot me as his wife, but still remembered our past when we were in love and those trivial times when we were young. However, he attributed these memories to a non-existent white moonlight. The white moonlight accompanied him in starting a business, accompanied him through the toughest days, and accompanied him step by step until now. But she didn't marry him. I don't know what kind of role Zachary has arranged for me that makes him extremely disgusted as soon as he sees me, but I'm not angry. After all, it is me who has been with him for 9 years. It is me who accompanied him from school uniforms to wedding dresses. It is also me who accompanied him from youth to maturity. He can't have a white moonlight. I am so certain. So when Serafina appeared, I thought she was just misunderstood by Zachary. My husband, with whom I have been in love for 9 years, has lost his memory and thinks he has a white moonlight that he loves but cannot have. I originally thought that Zachary was just confused in his memory and had placed our past memories on a fictional white moonlight. Later, I realized that I was extremely wrong. This is the fourth time I have been driven out of the ward by him after Zachary's car accident. The white door made a loud noise. The wooden door panel stopped just in front of my nose. Although it didn't touch me, it was like being slapped hard. Several people standing outside were whispering. Charlie came up and gently persuaded me, "Sister-in-law, Zachary's memory is a bit chaotic now and his emotions are not stable. Don't be angry." I tidied up the stray hairs at my temples and sighed softly. "I'm not angry. I just don't understand. After losing his memory, Zachary is gentle and polite to everyone, but when he sees me, he is like an enemy. Even if he hates me because of the white moonlight that he loves but cannot have in his heart, it wouldn't go so far." I gave the thermos bucket in my hand to Charlie. "Give this to him later. If he still refuses to eat it, just throw it away." Charlie took it, still hesitating. "Sister-in-law. It's okay." I showed a smile. "When he remembers, let him compensate me fully." On the day Zachary had a car accident, I was abroad. I rushed back overnight, but all I received was his cold face. When I arrived at the hospital, it was midnight. The lights in the corridor were a bit dim. The long corridor, empty and without anyone, inexplicably showed an indifferent and lonely atmosphere. When I pushed open the door, Zachary was still awake. He was sitting on the bed in a hospital gown, with a circle of gauze around his forehead. His face was pale and expressionless. He was completely different from the him I usually saw. Zachary met my eyes. Before I could speak, a huge noise exploded behind me. A black object flew past me and landed on the wall. My heartbeat accelerated. Then I heard my husband coldly utter a word, "Get out." Later, the doctor told me that Zachary had lost his memory. He lost his memory, but not completely. He forgot me as his wife, but still remembered our past when we were in love and those trivial times when we were young. However, he attributed these memories to a non-existent white moonlight. The white moonlight accompanied him in starting a business, accompanied him through the toughest days, and accompanied him step by step until now. But she didn't marry him. I don't know what kind of role Zachary has arranged for me that makes him extremely disgusted as soon as he sees me. But I'm not angry. After all, it is me who has been with him for 9 years. It is me who accompanied him from school uniforms to wedding dresses. It is also me who accompanied him from youth to maturity. He can't have a white moonlight. I am so certain. So when Serafina appeared, I thought she was just misunderstood by Zachary. I did try to tell Zachary. His overly sharp and cold attitude is in stark contrast to how he used to treat me. After being in love for 9 years, we hardly ever had a fight. I attribute it to Zachary's unlimited tolerance for me. Our relationship has always been very stable, even too smooth. So smooth that I firmly believe that Zachary will love only me in his life. We fell in love when we were young, and our feelings fluctuated repeatedly in the daily life. We did experience the 7-year itch, but we also got through it. 9 years is too long. So long that intertwined branches have grown between us, and there is no way to untangle them. So when my former lover faced me with a confrontational attitude, when Zachary looked at me with eyes like swords mixed with frost, rejecting me again and again, I felt an indescribable sense of depression and sadness. So I wanted to tell him, but the memories in his mind seemed to have formed their own logic. When I tried to restore the original truth of the facts, I instead disrupted his logical chain. The unbearable burden made him choose to escape. He fainted. When he woke up again, it was still the same. The doctor said that it would be best if I didn't stimulate him anymore. Take it slow. I always thought that it was because of this that Serafina had an opportunity. 1 week before Zachary was discharged from the hospital, he still refused to eat the food I made. Only his attitude was slightly softened and he would no longer directly shut me out. When we were in the same room, he was still cold. He didn't want to talk to me, so I just sat by the bed and looked at him. The gauze on the young man's head had been removed long ago. A small scar was exposed on his forehead. He leaned against the head of the bed with his eyes closed, his lips pursed into a straight line, and his brow slightly furrowed. I subconsciously reached out to smooth his brow. Zachary opened his eyes all of a sudden. I withdrew my hand, thinking that he was going to be angry again. I heard him ask, "Jocelyn, why did I marry you? Because you love me?" But I didn't say this sentence. The atmosphere in the ward suddenly became dull. The answer was on the tip of my tongue, but I was speechless. Serafina appeared at this time. She was carrying a pink thermos and pushed the door in directly. Her voice was sweet. "Zachary, I'm here." The young girl was wearing a beautiful dress. Her complexion was like a flower and her eyes were smiling, but when she saw me, she froze. I was also stunned. She looked 7% like me when I was young. I did try to tell Zachary. His overly sharp and cold attitude is in stark contrast to how he used to treat me. After being in love for 9 years, we hardly ever had a fight. I attribute it to Zachary's unlimited tolerance for me. Our relationship has always been very stable, even too smooth. So smooth that I firmly believe that Zachary will love only me in his life. We fell in love when we were young, and our feelings fluctuated repeatedly in the daily life. We did experience the 7-year itch, but we also got through it. 9 years is too long. So long that intertwined branches have grown between us, and there is no way to untangle them. So when my former lover faced me with a confrontational attitude, when Zachary looked at me with eyes like swords mixed with frost, rejecting me again and again, I felt an indescribable sense of depression and sadness. So I wanted to tell him, but the memories in his mind seemed to have formed their own logic. When I tried to restore the original truth of the facts, I instead disrupted his logical chain. The unbearable burden made him choose to escape. He fainted. When he woke up again, it was still the same. The doctor said that it would be best if I didn't stimulate him anymore. Take it slow. I always thought that it was because of this that Serafina had an opportunity. 1 week before Zachary was discharged from the hospital, he still refused to eat the food I made. Only his attitude was slightly softened and he would no longer directly shut me out. When we were in the same room, he was still cold. He didn't want to talk to me, so I just sat by the bed and looked at him. The gauze on the young man's head had been removed long ago. A small scar was exposed on his forehead. He leaned against the head of the bed with his eyes closed, his lips pursed into a straight line, and his brows slightly furrowed. Thinking that he was going to be angry again, I heard him ask, "Jocelyn, why did I marry you? Because you love me." But I didn't say this sentence. I subconsciously reached out to smooth his brow. Zachary opened his eyes all of a sudden. I withdrew my hand. The atmosphere in the ward suddenly became dull. The answer was on the tip of my tongue, but I was speechless. Serafina appeared at this time. She was carrying a pink thermos and pushed the door in directly. Her voice was sweet. "Zachary, I'm here." The young girl was wearing a beautiful dress. Her complexion was like a flower and her eyes were smiling, but when she saw me, she froze. I was also stunned. She looked 7% like me when I was young. A huge wave of panic swept over me. The fleeting thought seemed to become a reality, and a crack opened in my heart. In the next second, I saw my cold husband's eyebrows softened, his eyes and brows full of affection. He softly called her, "Serafina." Charlie's words confirmed my guess. He sat on the chair outside the ward and sighed, looking apologetic. "Yes, sister-in-law. Zachary mistook her for the previous you." The matter was so absurd that I found it a little ridiculous. "When did it start?" Charlie put his hand on his forehead and hesitated before replying in a low voice, "On the 5th day after Zachary's car accident. So he never ate the food I made for him." "Because someone made food for him, right? So he didn't want to see me." "Because his white moonlight has appeared." Anger rose in my heart all of a sudden. Zachary's rudeness these days seemed to be mocking my stupidity. This ridiculous situation was like an absurd comedy. "Charlie, are you crazy?" My interlocked knuckles turned white. "He imagined a white moonlight, and you actually found one for him." Charlie sighed again. His gaze was heavy, and there was something in his eyes looking at me that I couldn't understand. "Sister-in-law, it's wrong of me to hide it from you, but this person wasn't found by me. Rather, it should be said that Zachary found her himself." I subconsciously wanted to refute him. But Charlie just lowered his head and sighed again. "He discovered it by accident. In the afternoon, there were people talking in the ward. He heard Zachary's soft laughter among them. At first, he thought it was me and thought that Zachary had remembered something. The conversation stopped. But it was a strange yet familiar face that pushed the door and came out. He and Serafina were stunned at the same time. Zachary stood in the room and called out to him. When he turned his head, Serafina quickly left. He asked Zachary who that was. Zachary lowered his eyes and replied, "Lover." When I pushed the door and entered the room again, the original conversation suddenly stopped. Two pairs of eyes focused on me. For a moment, the atmosphere in the room was extremely awkward. Zachary's gaze on me was still cold. Serafina was sitting by the bed, and the spoon in her hand froze in midair. Zachary ate along with her without changing his expression and then asked me again, "What are you doing here? What am I doing here?" I didn't look at him. My gaze fell on Serafina. She averted her eyes and shrank back. Immediately, Zachary stood in front of her. I almost laughed in anger. "Zachary, what are you doing again? I know I shouldn't be angry with him. He's just confused." But seeing him instinctively protecting another person, I still couldn't control my temper. "Don't forget that we are legally married. I can't tell the truth and can only restrain him with this kind of title." Zachary's expression changed again and again. "Serafina, you go out first." Serafina behind him paled a bit. Zachary turned back and gave her a reassuring smile. She immediately felt at ease. She put down the bowl, walked past me sideways and didn't look at me. The door of the room was closed by her. Once again, only Zachary and I were left in the room. I bit my lip and clenched my hand hanging by my side into a fist. "Jocelyn." His voice was flat. "Let's get a divorce." With all my strength, I restrained myself from rushing up and slapping him. "Zachary has just lost his memory, not his mind." I can hardly imagine such a sentence coming out of his mouth. I could only tightly grip the hem of my skirt. After a long time, I squeezed out a sentence from between my teeth. "Why? She has been with me for so long and deserves a proper status." Zachary lowered his eyes. "I was originally going to marry her. She accompanied me through thick and thin from having nothing. I just don't know why I ended up marrying you by mistake. Sorry, but it's clearly me who has been with you for so many years." The doctor's advice was like a curse, sealing the words I wanted to say. If only I were calmer. At least I could reason with him calmly or come up with a better way and take it slow without irritating him. But when that breath reached my chest, all the cold treatment and grievances of these days erupted. Like a sulky child, I looked at him and said word by word, "If you want me to divorce you, you are dreaming." The door of the ward was closed with a loud bang. Leaning against the door, I felt so powerless for the first time. I never thought Zachary would mention divorce to me, nor did I expect it to be for such a white moonlight. Zachary rarely said harsh words to me. In the most impoverished times, the two of us huddled in a leaking house, warming each other with our body heat. At that time, everything was terrible. He was cheated of money, his partner ran away, and he alone shouldered the debt. We couldn't afford the electricity bill. In winter, we only had a thick and heavy quilt. The water in winter was icy cold. He wouldn't let me touch the water. All the housework related to water was taken care of by him. His originally beautiful hands were covered with chilblains. But even though life was so difficult, he still didn't forget to give me a necklace on my birthday. The silver necklace was actually not expensive, just 100 or so yuan. For him burdened with debt, it was already a luxury. I was annoyed that he didn't actually need to spend such a large sum to buy me a gift. He just smiled and rubbed my face, then kissed me. He said, "Jocelyn, I must let you live a good life. Jocelyn, I will always love you. But now," he said, "Jocelyn, let's get a divorce." I was only angry with Zachary for one day. Thinking that he just had a memory disorder, I felt that I was also wrong and shouldn't be so fussy with a patient. When I came the next day with his favorite Yangchun noodles, Serafina was there again. She seemed bolder after being caught. The younger girl similar to me was intimate with Zachary. When I came, she was talking to him. Clearly there was no one else in the ward, but the two were still very close, whispering intimately. Zachary listened with a hint of smile at the corner of his eyes, just like when he listened to me before. It was an eyesore. I knocked on the door hard, interrupting the warmth. The smile at the corner of Zachary's eyes disappeared immediately. His look seemed frozen. I was stung and lost my mood. "I made Yangchun noodles for you." I lifted the thermos bucket and shook it, forcing a smile. "It's what you used to love the most." "No need." Zachary was aloof. "I've eaten." I noticed the pink thermos on the cabinet and a hint of lingering fragrance in the air. It seemed that a part of the memories between him and me had been snatched away by Serafina again. Anger surged up. Miss Song had better have some sense of shame. My gaze fell on her face, eyes as sharp as knives. Occupying something that doesn't belong to you is not glorious. Serafina's face paled a little. She opened her mouth to speak, but Zachary had already spoken up to defend her first. "If Miss Jiang isn't here to talk about divorce, then please leave." "I won't divorce." Zachary interrupted me. "I don't love you." He said it so calmly that I almost believed he didn't love me. "It shouldn't be like this." I bit my lip tightly. "Zachary. You will regret it." Zachary was discharged from the hospital. He didn't tell me. I went to the ward but found it empty. Only when I called Charlie did I learn that he had been discharged. But he didn't go home. Instinctively, I wanted to call him, but there was no answer. It had never been like this before. Zachary owns a lot of properties. I searched one by one from the city to the suburbs. Finally, Charlie called me again. He spoke carefully. "Sister-in-law," Zachary called me back. "Where is he?" "He is with Serafina. As soon as Charlie sent me the address, I drove there. Serafina lives in an old-fashioned neighborhood. The wall paint is mottled, and there is a layer of accumulated dust on the door. Old and familiar. In the past when we had no money, we also squeezed into such a place." I gently knocked on the door. A cheerful female voice came from inside. "Coming." The door was opened. When Serafina saw me, she was instantly stunned. "Zachary is sleeping." The familiar form of address made me feel nauseous for a moment and unnamed anger rose in my heart. I asked sharply, "Who allowed you to call him like that?" The girl shrank back in fright at my voice and a little redness appeared faintly at the corner of her eye. Serafina lowered her head. As if mustering up some courage, she looked up and stared directly into my eyes. "Miss Jiang, Zachary loves me." "Love you?" I was almost amused to anger. "Why does he love you? For your so-called 9 years of companionship that doesn't exist? Or for your appearance just like mine when I was young?" My tone wasn't fierce. I just spoke a little louder. But it seemed that she was as timid as a rabbit. Her eyes reddened a bit more, but she still refuted me tremulously. "No. Miss Jiang, it's true that you and I do look somewhat alike, but Zachary loves me." "What can you prove with?" "Miss Jiang. Zachary and I have known each other for more than a year." Before I could carefully analyze the meaning in her words, Zachary came out of the room. The man was wearing a loose and somewhat inexpensive white t-shirt. A few strands of hair at his cheeks were sticking up. He was drowsy and overlapped with his appearance at the age of 20. After Zachary became rich, the clothes on his body would never be less than 4 figures. I stared at him in a daze, then quickly, forcefully, and with a resounding slap, I hit Serafina. The crisp sound spread in the not-so-large rented room. Almost in an instant, I was pushed to the ground by a strong force. The things in the living room were very messy. I fell on a pile of sharp objects, and my hand was also scratched by a broken corner of the coffee table. Warm liquid dripped down, and wisps of pain spread from the wound. I just stared blankly at this somewhat glaring bright red. Zachary comforted Serafina. When he turned around and was about to scold me, he froze in an instant when he met my eyes. I'm actually not delicate at all. It's just that I was spoiled by Zachary before. He held me like a precious jewel. If I was injured even a little bit, he would be on high alert. I laughed at him for being too nervous about me. He just smiled, hugged me in his arms, and sighed softly. My Jocelyn has endured so much hardship with me. It's only right for you to be a little delicate. Jocelyn, don't get hurt anymore, okay? You will always be the most important. Tears dropped one by one, blossoming a dark splash on my skirt. I saw Zachary subconsciously let go of Serafina's hand and was about to rush towards me. In my teary eyes, a kind of joy arose. But in an instant, it quickly disappeared. Serafina hugged him from behind, tightly sticking to his back, and called him mournfully, Zachary. Zachary's movements suddenly stopped. A trace of confusion flashed across his face, and he stood there helplessly. My heart softened. In the next second, he fell heavily to the ground. Zachary never thought he had lost his memory. Because only the memories about me and Serafina in his mind were jumbled. For me, they were jumbled. But for him, his memory was complete. Charlie couldn't persuade him to accept treatment from a psychologist, and neither could I. The doctor said not to stimulate him all at once but to take it slowly. This seemed like an unsolvable problem. I couldn't move forward nor retreat. I was worried that he would be too stimulated, and I was also afraid that he would remember too late. I could only look forward to him remembering me sooner and sooner every day. But this time, it failed again. When Zachary regained consciousness, Serafina was faster than me. She quickly opened the door and threw herself into Zachary's arms. Zachary didn't push her away. I leaned against the doorframe and watched them coldly. Zachary raised his eyes. When he met my eyes, he suddenly reached out. Serafina was pushed staggering. She turned around and saw me, and tears immediately fell. When Zachary saw her crying, he hurriedly wiped her tears and asked her softly, "What's wrong? I can't bear to see such a warm scene." I interrupt by saying, "Miss Song, I want to talk to you." Serafina is like a frightened rabbit. The originally reddened eyes are on the verge of shedding tears in an instant. She subconsciously looks at Zachary. Zachary hesitates for a moment. "Don't worry. We'll be outside. Go." Zachary pats Serafina's hand comfortingly. "If there's anything, just call me." Serafina nods heavily. I just find it ironic. Can I eat her up? 12 The red mark on half of Serafina's face hasn't disappeared yet. I really hit her hard. There are still tears hanging at the corner of Serafina's eyes. She looks pitiful, like me but also not like me. Miss Song said that you and Zachary have known each other for more than a year. What does that mean? Serafina may not have expected me to be so calm. She lowers her head, folds her hands, and is silent for a while. After a long time, it seems that she musters up courage. "Miss Jung, Zachary really loves me. I know you two have known each other earlier, and I also know that I look a bit like you, but he definitely loves me. Miss Jung, Zachary is just restrained by marriage. If it weren't for you, we would have been together long ago." Serafina's cheekiness far exceeds my imagination. Does Miss Song have any mental illness? I cross my arms and retort coldly. Serafina's face turns pale at my words. "Miss Jung." She purses her lips. "In August last year, your grandma passed away. You kept calling Zachary. He kept comforting you, but he didn't come back. Because he was with me, Jocelyn." A little smile hooks up on the face of the disguised little white rabbit. It seems that she has found my sore spot. There is a hidden pleasure in the smile. Throughout last year, Zachary was with me, traveling around the world. I almost slap her again. But Serafina covers her face first. With a weak voice, she calls out Zachary. The people in the ward quickly stand in front of her, their faces as frosty as frost. My hand freezes in midair and then falls back. Zachary doesn't scold me. He just glances at me and then leads Serafina by the hand and takes her back to the room. I have no intention of arguing with him anymore. I call Charlie and ask him to come and help watch Zachary. When I get back in the car, a strange number suddenly sends a screenshot of a Weibo post. I know it's Serafina. I should find this Weibo and take a look. But there was another voice clamoring, preventing me from clicking on it. People's sixth sense always comes inexplicably. A great panic emerged out of thin air. I knew that if I really searched for this Weibo post, perhaps Zachary and I would never be able to go back. I still went to look. The pictures on Weibo crushed my last bit of delusion. Every picture and text with detailed dates can find a corresponding scene in my memory. The 7-year itch that I thought I had safely passed through. I thought it was just a small episode in the years to come. I thought Zachary just needed time to find his heart back. So I gave him enough space. We loved too smoothly. Just that year. A year later, he became the previous Zachary again. At that time, I was still very happy. I thought it was just that love had turned into a part of family affection. We were still each other's only one. But I was so stupid. Those trivial details of that year were gradually magnified. The time of that year was replayed like a revolving lantern. The emotions that I had carefully hidden once again resurfaced. I had to accept a fact. Zachary whom I love, Zachary whom I thought would absolutely never betray me, Zachary who has been entangled with me for more than 10 years, he cheated. They met last year. Serafina joined Zachary's company. And in turn, without any work experience, suddenly became an employee favored and valued by the leader. At first, she just recorded her heartbeat for her superior. A young girl is in love, but it's just a silent crush, but later she found out that the person she likes is also favoring her. The two gradually came together. Zachary took Serafina to many places. They went to see the sunrise in the sea of clouds, the sunset by the sea, saw the aurora in northern Europe, saw the solitary smoke in the desert, and saw. In the name of business trips, they almost went to all the plans that were once recorded in my memo. I planned countless times and fantasized enthusiastically about the scenes where Zachary and I went to these places. We want to take a lot of pictures. Record every moment. But he is very busy. I always thought he was very busy. When making excuses became a habit, I stopped mentioning it. It's just that I didn't expect that he had actually been there. With another person who is like me. Walking through every place I yearn for. Not me. When they were watching the aurora in northern Europe, it was March. The chill of early spring had not yet dissipated. Wearing a thick cotton-padded jacket, I stuffed myself into a house full of heating. When I called him in a daze from a fever, he and Serafina were standing under the gorgeous aurora and replied vaguely to me, "Go to sleep early." A good sleep will make it all better. I will come back early. They went climbing and watched the sunrise together in May. The date on Weibo is marked as May 27th. Golden light leaped out from the clouds and appeared in the world resplendently. That day, I worked overtime all night. When the morning light was faint, I couldn't help but send a message to complain to him. He replied very quickly. I was surprised and delighted. I asked him why he got up so early. He said that he went climbing and watching the sunrise with his colleagues. He lied. He only went there alone with Serafina, but at that time, I believed him. I said, "Then you have a good time with your colleagues." Going to the seaside was in June. Serafina posted many photos. Many of them were taken by Zachary for her. Their island trip lasted for a long time, from the middle of the month to the end of the month. During this time, it was exactly when my grandma passed away. People's birth, old age, sickness and death are all common sense, but the pain of losing a close relative still made me unable to get out of it for a long time. But during this sad time, Zachary was not by my side. Now I know. He was looking at the sea with Serafina. The Weibo stopped in December last year. Then in April this year, it started again. Every meal Serafina made for him. Their intimate selfies in the ward. And some trivial and warm little things. The top Weibo was posted in June last year. There is only one sentence. Hope to marry you soon. My world collapsed suddenly. I was awakened by the ringing of the phone from my sleep. It was Zachary who called. Jocelyn. His voice was a little hesitant. Let's talk. If only it had been earlier. Much earlier. This sentence came too late. No need. My voice was hoarse. Zachary, let's get a divorce. The exhalation on the other end froze instantly. Your voice. It doesn't matter. I interrupted him dejectedly. Didn't you say you wanted a divorce? I agree. There was a long hesitation on the end. I heard his breathing on the phone. It grew heavier and heavier. Finally, I heard him say, "Okay." Zachary's divorce agreement was delayed for about 10 days. I didn't urge him. During this period, I didn't look for him again. There was only an unrefusable dinner party. In the Vanity Fair, interests were deeply intertwined. He had to bow to me. I agreed. When entering the banquet hall with his arm in mine, it was just like before. We carried wine glasses and shuttled among the crowd, talking with all kinds of people. I always maintained an appropriate smile and played the role of a model couple with Zachary. When we finally had a moment of leisure, I suddenly asked him, "Isn't Serafina angry?" Zachary suppressed his smile. The corners of his mouth tightened into a straight line. After a long silence, he asked me softly, "Jocelyn, are we?" The latter half of the sentence was lost in his throat. The confusion on his face was only for a moment. Then he sighed again. "Forget it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you. You are certainly sorry for me. Not just this. When he remembers. He will then know exactly what he has done." When leaving the hotel, Serafina was waiting for Zachary at the door. The wind was strong at night and there was still some chill. Wearing a white dress, she stood alone in the night, looking delicate and pitiful. Zachary immediately shook off my hand and trotted over to put his coat on her shoulders. Then he held her hand and gently reproached her, but his tone was full of affection. I stood at the door and watched the two people each other under the street lamp. For a moment, it was like seeing Zachary and me a few years ago. I knew Serafina had seen me. So she curved her eyes and snuggled in Zachary's arms, wantonly showing me their intimacy. I just stood there, like a bystander, expressionless. Zachary seemed to suddenly remember that I was still there. When he looked back at me and saw my calm expression, he was stunned for a moment. I then forced a smile. "Send me the divorce agreement earlier, Zachary." He seemed to be surprised by my attitude and didn't know how to reply for a moment. I didn't look at him anymore. My gaze passed over him and landed on Serafina's face. "Miss Song." My smile deepened. "May you get what you want as soon as possible." The little white flower showed a smile. Standing behind him, for the first time, she didn't show weakness. She was swaggering and complacent. "Thank you for your blessing, Miss Jung. Zachary and I will be very happy." Zachary's complexion changed slightly. His lips moved, but still he said nothing. The second before getting into the car and opening the door, I suddenly looked back and shouted loudly, "Zachary." Just like 7 years ago, when I saw Zachary waiting for me downstairs in the teaching building after class, I shouted his name loudly across a large group of people, without any image and full of excitement. And Zachary looked back. Just like 7 years ago, except that he didn't smile at me. I didn't run towards him either. This time there was no crowd separating us. I looked at him, smiling with curved eyebrows and eyes. "Wish you lose your beloved forever." The divorce agreement was transferred by a lawyer. I don't want to see Zachary again. A few thin pieces of paper are the final ending of our entanglement for more than 10 years. The division of property didn't turn ugly. I just reminded him that he had an affair during marriage. He admitted the role of the wrong party in marriage and tried his best to compensate me when dividing property. It only took me 5 seconds to sign my name. How ridiculous. In the end, my marriage ended so suddenly because of the changes in just 1 month. Zachary and I made an appointment to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau on Monday morning. He called me again. I didn't answer. When I put it down and clicked on Weibo, I saw that Serafina's pinned post had been changed. It was replaced by a smiling face emoji. I just closed Weibo indifferently. I went very early on Monday. I came before the Civil Affairs Bureau opened. I waited from dawn to dusk. Zachary didn't come. The crowd on the street was constantly flowing. I sat in the car and looked out of the window listlessly, watching the sky gradually being dyed with rich colors. The mobile phone rang over and over again. Until the call from another contact came. Charlie's voice was with a strong panting sound, extremely anxious. "Sister-in-law, where are you? Zachary has called you many times. You haven't answered. He just had an operation. He insists on seeing you. The phone can't get through. He just ran out. I couldn't stop him. Sister-in-law, please call back." I lowered my eyes and asked softly, "Did he remember?" "Yes, Zachary fainted yesterday. When he was sent to the hospital, the doctor said that an operation needed to be arranged. It was just finished today." The street lights lit up one by one. As the lights were just coming on at dusk, it was time to return home. The Civil Affairs Bureau had closed its doors, and the number of people on the street was gradually decreasing. A taxi stopped in front of the Civil Affairs Bureau. A familiar figure rushed out in a panic from the car. Tall and thin, wearing a hospital gown, with one of the slippers on his feet lost while running. He stood on the road looking around in a daze. I rarely see Zachary in such a sorry state. After the age of 25, he became President Joe, respected by everyone. He was always in control of everything and always calm and composed. Even when he lied to me, he didn't find me and picked up his phone to call me again and again. Over and over. Charlie's call hadn't been hung up yet. When he called, all he could hear was the mechanical female voice repeating continuously. I watched as his expression collapsed little by little. He looked empty and lonely in the vast twilight. I watched as his emotions collapsed little by little, with pain entangling him all over. Looking at his reddened eyes, hunched back, and ridiculous outfit, I laughed silently. "We are going to get a divorce," I said softly. "Don't call me sister-in-law anymore." The person on the other end of the phone was startled. Just as he was about to say something, I cut off the call. The car started and drove away from this place all at once. The farther away I was, the more unrestrained my happiness became. I never thought of giving Zachary to Serafina. On the contrary. I want her to never get Zachary for the rest of her life. I sent something to Zachary at just the right time. Something that was enough to overturn all his perceptions. I should be glad that I was once stupid enough to preserve the memories so perfectly, thinking that when we were old, we could still recall the past together. Before, I cared about him and followed the doctor's advice, afraid of stimulating him. Now I'm not afraid anymore. Zachary called me like crazy. I didn't answer any of his calls. He sent me messages again, long and short compositions that were annoying to read. I didn't go home and stayed in a hotel. A colleague from the company said that Zachary had come looking for me. She told him that I was on vacation. At the moment when the plane to Iceland was about to depart, I answered Zachary's call. He seemed unexpected. His heavy breathing fell on my ear. He spoke carefully. "Jocelyn?" "Yes." I fiddled with the tassel on my bag and replied softly, "When will you come home?" His tone even contained a hint of flattery, as if he was just coaxing a sulking child. By gently turning the page, everything could be treated as if it didn't exist. How could it be? That was 9 years. The intertwined branches made me at a loss, so I chose the most resolute way. Those years of memories and time turned into knives. It cuts between us so deeply that it's bleeding profusely. Every break is filled with blood and tears. How can it be decent? The bond is so deep that when we part, it will be torn apart into pieces. I never thought that one day we would come to such a point. Nor did I think that I would hate Zachary so deeply. "Don't call anymore," I said softly. "When the divorce date is set, we'll see each other again." I hung up the phone immediately. The suitcase made a small rolling sound on the ground as I boarded the plane to Iceland. When I arrived, the snow had not melted yet. On the 3rd day after my arrival, there was another heavy snowfall. My cousin who has settled in Iceland took time to accompany me in having a snowball fight. The two of us, almost 30 years old, were like when we were young, wrapped up like a ball and nimbly shuttled through the snow. Finally, tired from playing, I simply lay down in the snow. The falling snowflakes landed on my face and immediately melted. The tiny drops of water slid across my skin, cool and icy. I looked up at the falling snow. The cold air surged in from all directions, drilling into my clothes. My hands embedded in the snow were so cold that they were almost losing sensation. It was like drowning in this snowstorm. My cousin's face suddenly popped up, smiling with narrowed eyes. "Get up quickly, Jocelyn. The cookies baked by your sister-in-law are ready." I stretched out my hand. The originally delicate fingers had become red and swollen, very ugly, a bit like pig's trotters. The fine snowflakes fell on them and quickly melted. It hurts so much. It hurts so much that my eyes are sore and swollen. "Brother," I called him in a hoarse voice. "The water in winter is really so cold." Zachary dragged it out for more than 10 days. He tirelessly sent me messages and called me, begging for my forgiveness. I only answered 2 calls. The first one was from Charlie. He hesitantly called me, "Sister Jocelyn." Before I could reply, he continued, "Zachary fired Serafina. She did something wrong and no company will want her anymore. Zachary hasn't come to the company for several days. Zachary got drunk and told me a lot about you too. The things you sent him, he looks at them every day. Zachary said he knows he was wrong. Sister Jocelyn." I didn't reply, and Charlie just kept talking. Zachary got drunk again yesterday. His voice suddenly became hoarse. He cried, Sister Jocelyn, I have never seen Zachary look so vulnerable before. Obviously you were so good before. That's 9 years. Sister Jocelyn, Zachary said he is waiting for you to come home. There will never be a second 9 years in this world when someone accompanies him from obscurity to success. There will never be a second me who loves him passionately and sincerely with all my courage for so many years. We are the only ones engraved in each other's bones. When we part, it is bound to be a bloody mess. But still, I don't want him anymore. It is he who has changed his heart. It is he who has cheated. It is he who has done wrong. I would rather he change his heart completely than find someone who looks 7 points like me to disgust me. He can't not know how much I hate cheating. But he still did it. Those who lose me will lose me forever. The second call I received was from Zachary. After 15 days of stalemate, he seemed to finally realize that I really would never look back. He sent a new divorce agreement. When I received it, I was curled up in a chair in front of the fireplace, holding the black tea boiled by my sister-in-law, warm and drowsy. I mustered up my energy and flipped through it. Zachary was even more generous than before. He almost gave me most of his property. So when his call came, I answered it, Jocelyn. The person on the end of the phone had a muffled voice. I think he should be drunk. He probably didn't expect me to answer. His breathing paused. And very carefully, he called out again, Jocelyn. Then he called me over and over again like a fool. Jocelyn. Jocelyn. 4. Choked up while calling. Finally, I heard him ask. Jocelyn. Am I going to lose you forever? I replied softly. The day I returned from Iceland, summer was almost approaching. The sun was shining brightly and the breeze was gentle. Zachary came to pick me up at the airport. I stood outside and spotted him at a glance. He had lost a lot of weight. His face looked haggard. These days, due to excessive drinking, staying up late, and repeatedly going to the hospital, he had brought a series of illnesses upon himself. The gloom on his face hadn't dissipated. There was no trace of his once high-spirited appearance. When he saw me, his eyes lit up for a moment and then immediately dimmed. Jocelyn. Let's go directly to the Civil Affairs Bureau. I interrupted him. The procedures were completed quickly. When I got the green booklet in hand, it seemed as if a heavy burden had been lifted from me, and I suddenly felt relieved. The sunlight at the end of spring wasn't very warm, but it was very bright. So bright that it just made me feel that everything will be better in the future. That box of things sent to Zachary was also carefully examined by me one by one on the night after I read Serafina's Weibo. From high school to college. From school uniforms to wedding dresses. In just over 10 years, it was all flipped through by me in one night. I sat in front of the lamp until dawn. In our 20s, our love for each other was so abundant that it was about to overflow. But now, I don't love Zachary at all. What's the use of a short essay? Zachary. You have to be more miserable than me to count as an apology. I turned around, met Zachary's eyes, and called him softly with a smile on my brows. Zachary. Congratulations to you. You have lost your beloved forever. The last glimmer of light shattered in his eyes. His face was ashen. His face was ashen. His face was ashen. His face was ashen. His face was ashen.